female inmates, how do you think your prison experience was different from what you have heard about male prisoners' experiences? Please consider subscribing if you enjoy the video. I spent 9 months inside a women's county jail. Never went to prison. The women constantly walked around and talked to each other. I heard co's and volunteers that this never happens in the men's units. There are no men walking the yard laps, chit-chatting. They sit, they gamble commissary over card games. That's it. Most of the commissary they get they don't even eat. Just gamble with it. In the women's unit, we also made each of the jailhouse birthday cakes and cards and passed it around for everyone to sign. I heard this doesn't happen in the men's unit. Makes sense. Yeah, this is pretty true. Except a lot of the men I know who've been in county would horse around a lot. Like they definitely spend their time gambling commissary and hustling for personal products. And they're not as friendly as women. But they do horse around a bit as guys do. They'll usually have 1 or 2 guys they bro up with for safety's sake and friendship. But they're not at all like women with taking care of each other and being friendly. Okay, as apparently the only actual female prison inmate on Reddit, it is much different than male prison. I was in prison for 2.5 months last year. My ex was in prison for 16 months. In women's prison, while there is still violence, there's less violence, and it's usually over girlfriends. Men's prison has major race gang activity. Women's prison really doesn't. If anyone acts in a racist way, they're getting the shit knocked out of them. Rapists and child abusers get the frick knocked out of them in both male and female prisons. Absolutely nobody tolerates that shit. There's a lot more gay for the stay type shit going on in women's prison. But for the women who are fully straight and not interested, that's mostly respected. Yeah, you'll still have some disrespectful hoes acting like men, hitting on you and trying to convince you to give them a chance. But as long as you're firm about your boundaries and not being interested, they'll back off. Women are just as catty in prison as they are outside of it. But it's a little worse, because almost everyone that's in prison has had some kind of trauma, abuse in their past that affects their mental health and makes them act in ridiculous ways, which is how they ended up in prison in the first place. There are a lot of trans men and women in there, and I don't really know how it differs from men's prison. I didn't ask the ex if there were any trans women there, but at least in women's prison they didn't keep us separate and everyone was completely cool with it. Nobody got harassed. Honestly, it was really chill. You just have to be respectful of other people and their property, but also not trust anyone and keep your shit locked up, because you're in prison. Thank you for being the one legitimate comment on this post. At least my time in prison was good for something. This is probably a rude question, and you definitely don't have to answer it if you don't want to, but why did you go to prison? I think so. The prison I was in was men on one side and women on the other, so the van ride from court was shared and a couple of the lads gave me a few warnings that women were worse and they felt bad for me. That really made me feel confident going in. On the whole, where I was, most of the women were in for drug charges, mainly addicts themselves. I was in for financial stuff, so I kept out of most of it. There was a lot of sex, a lot of self-harm, and I mean a scarily ridiculous amount. Pretty much consistent backgrounds of poverty, abuse. Most were fine. Some just horrifically scary. We had one nonce come in, and she was not treated well. The worst thing was one of them grassing a couple of the others up. She was injured both externally and internally with a chair leg. That was rough shit. I then got shipped out to a foreign nationals prison where 80% are waiting to be deported to their home countries. They kept 20% nationals to basically run the place. That was different. Either women used as drug mules by their pimps, dealers or full-blown gangsters. Not much in between except for a Muslim lady called Latifa who shared her dates with me that she had for Ramadan. For non-UK people, nonce, pedo grass, snitch. I can actually answer this speaking factually correct according to PIA jails. My boyfriend and I were both imprisoned at the same time when I was 19 for narcotics. I was met by 2 females I knew who gave me extra socks and helped me find comfort while awaiting sentencing. I was scared to come out of my cell and read mostly, but they helped me feel not alone. The women played cards and watched cops mostly, staying off in their own groups. My boyfriend at the time did not get such a warm welcome, but was met by another male he knew to help him as well. From what they both tell me, there was immediately a sizing up that happened with some of the guys where they had to talk out of a fight. The men were hostile and rude to each other's cliques. They too played cards and watched TV. but not quietly together like the women, and a lot of punking or shit-talking day in and out. Yeah, definitely this. In the men's system here, when they go into reception, they are on 24 hours lockdown and everyone is treated as level 4 inmates until they're classed 2 men to a cell. Women's reception is dorm-style housing and run pretty much as it would be at level 1 or 2 while you get classed. I spent 6 months in prison in MO. Just got out a month ago. I'm not exactly a hardened criminal. I just fricked my life up for a while and paid the consequences for it. In my experience, the women I was there with were really nice and surprisingly supportive. The biggest fights, drama were over girlfriend stuff, and I can confirm too, there were tons of gay for the stay situations, and over girls having money put on other girls' books and having that go south. I've talked to enough male prisoners to know that the biggest things that seem to be different are the sexual assaults, level, frequency of violence and the gambling. Sexual assaults happened in the camp I was in, but seemed to be less prevalent than what I've heard of men's prisons. Fights were usually less ferocious, not always, and farther between for the women's camp, and while a lot of girls still gambled, they were less into it, and usually had lower stakes than the men seemed to be. And although we worked out a ton at rec, the prison I was in had exercise classes and most of the girls did those more than the lift heavy get ripped approach. We used to joke that men go to prison and get fit, women go to prison and get fat from canteen. Those noodles will get ya. Throwaway account, because I post semi-identifying stuff on my real one, and most of my friends don't know I went to prison. My mother was an inmate at a local prison and she tells me stories if I ask. She says women still like to take care of themselves in prison. Shaving, makeup, if they can afford it, make it, grooming, etc. There was one woman in particular that she will never forget. She was trimming her labia hair with some small blunt children's scissors she had. She ended up chopping a flap of her vaginal skin off. Blood everywhere and screaming like she's never heard before. She was thrashing all over the showers, clutching a good chunk of flesh in hand, and to this day my mother insists on going to get her PSSY waxed by a professional. Story scarred me Mayo. I've supervised both a male and woman's jail, multiple jails in fact, so I can speak from the perspective of responding to the emergencies and dealing with all the problems that come up. Men are violent, and use drugs often. They are more likely to get drunk on Pruno though. Fights are more organized for the most part. Race gang rules predominate most of the fights, so it's more controlled in the sense of a referee being present, being in a designated location, and authorized by the heads in the house. When someone goes down to the ground, the fight doesn't resume unless they get back up, or they are a chomo. There's no rules on how bad of a beating chomos get. Fights are usually more about breaking a rule, owing a debt, or disrespect. Assaults happened on staff, but generally, inmates know that brings heat on the house, so more searching for contraband, missed visits, and pissed off officers to deal with it, so most will get permission from their head before doing so, and females are most definitely off limits without an extremely good reason. I've had multiple inmates rush another inmate they thought was going to hurt me. Women have some informal structure amongst themselves, but it's not as strict. Anatomically, it's much easier to smuggle drugs in, so you have more overdoses going on than drunks. Fights tend to be more like high school, more gossip, more heat of the moment passion. No referee means no one is playing lookout or stopping things before someone gets seriously hurt. Chomos and child abuse are more tolerated. Females will hit officer without a second thought, and I mean vicious. Multiple fists to the face, drag them by the hair, MMA move fights. And on the debate when it comes to hygiene, male housing units tend to be cleaner than individual hygiene. Females tend to be cleaner on an individual basis than their housing unit. I suspect because of the informal structure amongst females. The female jail has a lot more gay for the stay. I would think it's more acceptable there. I'm too lazy to try to find it, but I thought I'd heard about a study that showed women had much more gender fluidity than men in their sexual preferences. Could it possibly be that society encourages girls to kiss other girls to be sexy, dirty, but when it's two men it means this whole dramatic thing. Girls don't point at other girls and go, "Ha, you're so gay." I visited the largest female prison in a state in the southeast US. The women got new release DVDs every Tuesday. They had a service dog that was supposedly there to help like 3 of the inmates put their shoes on. They had a full kitchen and were cooking up a storm when we went through. They had access to a ball sport of some kind, and I even learned about banana trees from a couple of them. LOL. It wasn't just the minimum security section either. That was the prison. We also visited death row though, like 8 women. They didn't have access to the stuff I described, but their cells, rooms were like little apartments. Fridges, TVs and all. Well, for one thing, male inmates don't get their hot dogs served chopped up into little pieces. Crafting hot dogs is a skill worth a lot of cigarettes. Is that an actual thing? Les Dong. CO, Ors, here, who has worked majority male prison, but also female. The former prisoner and others have pretty much covered it and are very insightful. They, female prisoners, are across the board much more entitled, do not handle being told no as well as male prisoners. They talk to staff a lot and get pissed if you call them by their last name. And as other posters have said, are at a much higher chance of having experienced trauma. Arguably though, I've yet to meet many male prisoners that have been exempt from traumatic and violent upbringings. A lot of these people are from similar suburbs and know each other, etc. And yes, surprisingly, male prisoners are usually pretty clean compared to female. You always get the odd chatty crim, but most keep their church cell in very good order or will follow directions to clean their cell if it gets below standard. We also don't chop up hot dogs here. I haven't heard of this, but this is Australia, so maybe different to other countries, as with some other cultural nuances. Are you expecting lesbian erotica or something in the comments? Orange is the new black as fiction, LOL. Thanks for watching and subscribe for more r/AskReddit content. Be sure to check out our playlist, link in the description below.